For most of us, a good scary story is, well, it's just a bit of fun, right? It's a temporary thrill, something to get your heart pumping for a night. But what about the people who tell these stories for a living? For them, that line between make believe and a reality that is just terrifying can get incredibly blurry. So today, let's explore that razor thin edge where horror stops being just a story. The ground slipped from under my feet. What mistake have I made? I mean, wow. That is a chilling question from a veteran Pakistani horror storyteller named Minhaj Ali Asghari. It's a question that literally haunted him after one of his radio shows seemed to unleash something real and terrible on one of his listeners. And that really gets to the core of what we're talking about here. What happens when the people who craft our nightmares find themselves facing a horror they absolutely cannot control? And this is where the two worlds really collide. For you and me, the audience, it's a temporary thrill. We get scared, we move on. But for the storyteller, when they get calls and messages from people who are genuinely terrified, in real distress, well, that entertainment suddenly becomes this heavy, heavy responsibility. It's a weight that can stick with them for a lifetime. And you can really see that burden in the stories that just leave a scar. We're going to start with a listener's call that took a turn that nobody, especially the host, ever expected. Okay, so picture this. A listener named Mohsin calls in. He's cheerful, he's confident, and he's telling this spooky story about a haunted basement in Canada. On a whim, Minhaj, the host, asks him to go film the outside of the house. Just a casual request. Well, Mohsin goes, and then he just disappears, radio silence for months. When he finally calls back, he's a completely different person. His energy is gone, his confidence is shattered, and he's claiming that the haunting from the story he told has now latched onto him. For Minhaj, it was this absolutely devastating lesson in the real-world power of his words. And then there are the stories that have no ending. Another one that left a deep mark was from a mother who called in, desperate about her son. It started with anger issues, but it got so bad he became a danger to himself and had to be put in rehab. And this is where it gets really chilling. The staff there reported hearing him not just talking to someone in his room, but hearing someone or something reply. His condition just got worse and worse, and years later, the mother called back to say her son is still living in constant terror, convinced that this female entity is going to kill him. It's just a story with no resolution, a perfect example of that helplessness the storytellers sometimes feel. But the horror isn't just happening to the listeners. Oh no. Sometimes it crosses that line and confronts the storytellers themselves in ways that are just impossible to write off. This is where it gets personal. So, one of the other storytellers, Adnan, is also a musician. He tells this story about a time his band needed a place to practice late at night without bothering anyone. So they go to this creepy, abandoned, half-finished house. In the middle of their session, some kind of shadow just zips past a window. And just like that, the music stops. What they felt next wasn't just fear. Adnan described it as a paralyzing, overwhelming terror. They scrambled to get their gear and just get out of there, feeling like they were absolutely not welcome. But Minaj's most intense experience, it happened during his very first horror show. He's signing off for the night and he playfully jokes with his listeners, something like, "Be careful, you might not be alone in your room." At that exact second, a perfectly formed human-like shadow appears on the studio wall right next to him. He just freezes, watching as this thing glides across the wall, heads for the massive, heavy soundproof studio door, and opens it as if with a single finger. The shadow goes through, and the door slams shut with so much force that the studio lights flicker and staff come running in, thinking a generator exploded. And it didn't even stop there. The activity in that radio station just escalated after that night. It actually became physical. One evening, one of the station's engineers bursts into Minhaj's studio completely terrified. He'd been trying to sleep in another room and woke up to find a child sitting on his chest strangling him. And he said, "I could physically feel the little hands on my neck." Just unbelievable. Okay, so these supernatural stories are absolutely terrifying. But the storytellers also point to a totally different kind of horror. And this one isn't paranormal at all. It's deeply, deeply human, the exploitation of people's fear. And what they've learned from the countless stories they've received from desperate listeners is just staggering.
They estimate that 99.9% of so-called spiritual healers, or babas, are fakes. They're just predators who take advantage of people's fear and desperation, and they often make a terrible situation so much worse.
The storytellers warn about this really ugly, predatory cycle that happens all the time. It starts with someone who's genuinely scared and confused. In that desperate state, they reach out to one of these charlatans, who then completely exploits their faith, demanding money, making them do strange things, and offering zero real help. So the victim is left not only with their original problem, but now they're broke and traumatized from being betrayed in their most vulnerable moment. So this brings us to the big question, doesn't it? After hearing all of this, stories of possible paranormal encounters and stories of definite human deception, what's the real horror story here? Is it the unseen things we can't explain? Or is it the very real people who are more than willing to prey on our belief in those things? Ultimately, the experiences of these storytellers leave us with a really powerful warning. Look, enjoying a scary story is one thing. It's fun. But when fear gets real, it is so important to know the difference between searching for answers and walking right into a trap. Because sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones we can see plain as day.